This is Donna Nova, the Transdimensional Twin Flame. While I am meditating and channeling, I will record this message about personal responsibility. We are thinking about personal responsibility as in the part you play in co-creating your own life. We co-create this life with the behaviors and the decisions that we make here on planet Earth. Other people's decisions, thoughts, and actions also come into play, but we must also consider the higher realms and our pre-incarnation blueprints. I am of the belief, as you've heard, I'm sure many times from lots of spiritual teachers, that we do plan our lives before we incarnate. If you take this to be a fact, this information should make sense to you. When it doesn't make sense to people, it's because they don't believe that they have planned this incarnation. And I know who those people are because it's everybody who feels like a victim and they're in their victimhood story. And I'm not saying they're not a victim, but they're identifying with the story of whatever's going on with them right now that they definitely do not prefer. And when you don't prefer something, it's very hard to own it and say, that's right, I made this. It's going really badly, Thanks for asking. But it's not to put blame on anyone. This is not victim blaming at all. This is taking accountability and responsibility for ourselves without blaming other people or ourselves. Take the blame out of it completely because that is a lower vibration. It's egoic. It is not a healthy or empowered state. And what we're going for here is empowerment. Never forget that. Everything I tell you will be coming from the perspective of someone who has come from absolute darkness, despair, and victimhood as a repeating life theme to someone who has experienced spontaneous Kundalini awakening, transcendent experiences, and expanded knowledge as well as travel into the higher realms, knowledge of the higher realms, travel to the higher realms, and perceptions of the higher realms and the non-physical realms, or at least a little bit of them. And to I own my own energy. I take responsibility for my energy, for my thoughts, for my actions, for my beliefs. They are mine. They are the only thing that we really own in this life. It's not even our personalities because they were co-created and crafted as a facade. We have gathered our personas like we're building a nest. And these avatars that we have, we chose them pre-birth. But everything after that, now we may have come in with a predisposition or a talent for something. And of course, we come in with interests because when we have a soul contract, it's sort of like a map. It's not completely fixed because we do have free will, but it's like a loose roadmap, I believe, where there are just endless choices that we can make along the way. It's not really about what choices you make. You'll learn from all of them equally. If you do something great and you know that it worked and you can keep doing that and build on that. And if you do something and it doesn't work out the way you wanted, well, you still learned something really important about what not to do next time. and why. So that's why there are no mistakes, in my opinion, and all choices are valid. Some are preferred and some are not preferred. And the problem comes when we resist the current reality that we're in because we don't prefer it. That's a state of victimhood, and it's somewhat insane because once something has occurred, it has occurred. And wishing that it was different doesn't change that. So, finding acceptance in all that is, in any given moment, it sounds like a tall order, and it will take some deconditioning because we've all been conditioned to expect things to be a certain way, to want them to be a certain way. It's more comfortable, obviously, in some ways, but it's also limiting. And when we realize that we're larger than we thought we were, the disempowerment goes away, and we don't have any shame or resistance to admitting the fact that we are partially responsible for our lives. Of course, there are people who are just completely innocent. They're in a situation that they did not cause, and that is the truth. There are innocent people, there are children, there are people who are disabled, there are just completely innocent people, and sometimes other people's decisions and circumstances encroach on their lives, and we think of that as being somehow a wrong or that they are a victim. Now, of course, you can be a victim of many things, but we have all been that person. And the lesson for all of us is to help each other, because at times where people are hurting and needing assistance, the collective human connection that we all have, this empathetic connection that should be natural, that's what can be activated. So sometimes someone or ourselves needing assistance is a mechanism for helping someone else give assistance, because we are all equal parts of source consciousness. And from what the goddess tells me, she loves it that we came here to create. She thinks that's the most interesting thing possible. That's why we came here. So the more unique and the more yourself you can be, the more she loves it. It's very entertaining. But defining situations as right or wrong is basically saying that you just you disown a part of reality. And that's the same way people get in trouble disowning parts of themselves and their shadow side. The shadow side isn't bad. The darkness isn't bad. We need the dark and the light. There's nighttime and daytime, at least in most parts of the world. There's a balance, you know. There's the flip side of everything, left and right, up and down, as above, so below. It's duality, right? So to completely disown one half of that, um, it's not going to work, because then you're not integrating reality into your life. And if you can't integrate the concept of your own reality and understand what you're dealing with, then how can you ever affect change? You can't empower yourself to change your circumstances, if that's what you want to do, if you don't own what's happening in the first place. If you have not looked in the mirror and looked deep inside yourself and done introspection work, what's called shadow work, in spiritual circles we call it shadow work, based on Carl Jung. He was a visionary psychologist who coined a lot of phrases that we still use, like synchronicity and the shadow, for meaning the subconscious. So the subconscious isn't bad. That's why a lot of this that I'm talking about involves the subconscious. So even if you don't um, really identify with co-creating your life, it could have been subconsciously. A lot of things that we do are subconscious that none of us realize we're doing. We all do it. Every single person has a subconscious from which they are manifesting. They are also possibly manifesting from their conscious mind, and from their higher mind. Uh, it is like a triangle. It's like a trinity of energy. So there's all these focus points from which our consciousness is projecting. And if any of them are distorted by a lack of energy flow, a lack of attention, or lack of understanding, or lack of belief that you can use these things, if any of those avenues are distorted, the projection that you are putting out there that becomes your life is also distorted. It means you're not seeing every angle. So, taking responsibility for ourselves doesn't mean taking blame, but it also doesn't mean blaming other people. That's not really productive. Um, so, what started this message was this sentence, which was, everyone expects people to take responsibility for themselves and the parts that they've played in each of our lives. But how often do each of us look at ourselves and take full responsibility for ourselves? So everybody's walking around noticing all the ways that everybody else is failing to live up to their responsibilities in whatever way they consider that. Personal responsibilities within relationships, responsibilities to the planet, like how their lifestyles, responsibilities to be a considerate and kind neighbor or coworker or friend, um, all these things that we want other people to be accountable for, not even counting energy, because most people they still don't understand that we need energetic maintenance. That's why energetic hygiene is important, meditation is important, the chakras are real. They are energetic portals that connect us to the etheric world. There are so many levels of energy around us. It starts um, directly outside our physical bodies. There are chakras outside of our physical bodies called the transpersonal chakras. But I'm not even really talking about energetic responsibility. That's a whole other topic that's even deeper than this one that I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the responsibility you have with your own behavior. And that does include your thoughts, though, because your thoughts become thought forms. Everything that we think becomes a real thing somehow. People say that in the fourth dimension, all of the thought forms that we have are real. So that there's all this energetic garbage because most people's thoughts all day aren't very great, and they're not important. If you're like a lot of people, probably most people, you have a running dialogue in your head of nonsense. You're like just talking to yourself incessantly and judging and saying little things. And you might not even notice it because if you're not very mindful, this stuff goes on and you don't even stop and think, who is that talking? Why would they say that about me? Like sometimes it's a ugly little voice in your head that criticizes everything you do. And if you ever stop to listen to that voice and ask, where did that come from? You'll find out that it's not you. It's not your higher self, that's for sure, because your higher self loves you. It's coming from a higher place. Anything that is critical of you and judging and fear-based and any of those emotions, they're on the lower end of the vibrational scale. That's never going to be one of your spirit guides. It's never going to be your higher self, and it's never going to be God. It's going to be a distorted ego. Um, And we get that from early on in our lives if we don't have caregivers that give us healthy levels of self-esteem, um, the right kind of childcare. That's where the stuff starts. So it's not our fault if we believe things about ourselves that aren't ideal. Self-limiting beliefs, it's not a character flaw at all. None of this is. Um, but when you have a limiting belief or a belief that just doesn't serve you or that it's not even true, it really makes sense to look at that, which is what shadow work is. When I talked about the introspection work that you can do um, to figure yourself out at this deep level, once you start going into your subconscious and figuring out what's going on, it is the most liberating feeling. People shy away from it thinking that it's scary. I just don't find it scary at all, and I'm sure that's partly just me because I'm like I have 4 Scorpio placements. I'm a Scorpio with a stellium in Scorpio, which means I go deep into these things. Um, but not everybody does. Not everybody wants to. But if you're capable of understanding these concepts and you've hit a wall in your life as far as why isn't this working in whatever way you feel it's not working, sometimes when you hit a crisis point, that's when you crack open because you've surrendered and you've said, okay, I give up. I can't do this anymore. Help, A lot of people spiritually awaken at their lowest point when they just surrender. You hear that story over and over again. That happened to me. My awakening was very textbook. It was very amazing, but it was pretty standard. It's like serious depression, anxiety, dark night of the soul, nervous breakdown for 4 years. No, 5 years. And then I started meditating. And 2 months later, I just had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening in the presence of Source, which I later found out was the Black Light, which was also the goddess who said she was the violet flame, that I later, 10 years later, found out was actually the God, the same goddess that I was, with Source. Source and this goddess were the same. And my story might be different than some people's, but the circumstances of the serious dark night of the soul that just wouldn't end, and the fact that the universe took away everything in my life that wasn't mine, it wasn't me. It stripped the facade away, and all I had left was myself. And I knew this. It was obvious what was happening. And as I went along, I learned the terms for these things and the fact that this was, like an initiation process that you go through if you're going to get to a higher level of consciousness. Basically, it's an evolution path, and it's a voluntary path. You can, in a way, it's voluntary. Once you awaken, you can't really unsee what you saw, but you don't have to go down that road. But I did. So what I'm saying is, when I started looking into shadow work was the same time frame. And I was not shy about it because I thought, I have nothing to lose. Clearly, there are things going on that I was not aware of. Let me see if I can find out what those are and help myself. Not like I thought I was broken. I wasn't blaming myself. That's not healthy. That's not shadow work. Shadow work is about discovering and embracing and loving unconditionally the parts of yourself that you once dismissed and hid and suppressed. The shadow side. Everybody has one, So this work is about recognizing that wounded child in yourself and embracing and loving that person, because it does matter. They have found that you can actually affect your present by doing work with yourself from the past. There is no linear time. So a lot of this energetic work and spiritual work can be done outside of the time space continuum that we know, because energy is not local, it's not housed within a container. It can animate anything and it can leave. And as we know, energy is not destroyed. So when it leaves a physical body, that body ceases to be necessary. But that energy that was in there does continue to live. That's why our loved ones in spirit, they're still themselves. And then they can also be other things. It's just a different form of life, but it is still life. And once you know that we came here to learn, if you believe what I believe, which is that Earth is a school, and so we chose curriculums and whatever, that's why it's good to find yourself, because once you figure out who you are, then you're going to naturally fall into an alignment with what you came here to do. And once you do that, not only do you start to love your life when maybe you've never loved it before, you start to realize that you have so much power that you didn't know you had. And if you know who you are, then you know what you want and don't want in a really clear way. So you're not codependent, you're not dependent, you're not in victim mode. You get to make informed choices about yourself and awakened and aligned choices about yourself because you know yourself. You're like, no, I don't want this. Yes, I do want that. This person doesn't feel energetically aligned with me. This person does. It helps you make decisions in every level of your life once you do this inner shadow work. Once you know yourself, take ownership of yourself and then incorporate every part of yourself into a whole, then you can be on the path that you signed up for in the first place. And once you're on that path, things get so much easier because your entire outer world is like a reflection and a projection of your inner world. If we are co-creating this reality, and I've been told from my twin flame Chris across the veil and my other guides, as well as I've heard this from so many other teachers, that we are projecting this reality from our own consciousness to be whatever we think it's going to be, whatever we want it to be. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that's ridiculous. There's so many horrible things going on right now. Why would I do that? There's subjective and objective reality. Objective is the one where we all have sort of a consensus reality because we do have consciousnesses that overlap. So it's the larger reality. And one person doesn't really control that, except when you think about it, how do you know what the consensus reality looks like to each individual person? You don't know that we're all experiencing the same reality at all because you can never go inside someone else's head. You can't see from anybody else's perspective, only yours. The only way you can see from someone else's perspective is psychically to temporarily merge with another's consciousness. You can do this with mediumship, psychic, or remote viewing. Those are some 3 techniques that come to mind. You can see out of somebody else's perspective for a minute. But you'll never get the full picture because you're not them. So we don't even know that we're all living in the same reality. And that should tell you that's the objective reality. The subjective reality is the smaller reality, which I would argue is actually the bigger reality. The reality that is your personal reality, your life, your inner world, that world that only you know because you're the only person who's ever seen out of your own eyes. The subjective reality is the one that you have a lot of control over. But people who are asleep to this knowledge, which I would say spiritually asleep. Again, there's no judgment there, but it's like when you haven't woken up to the truth that you're bigger than you thought. You're not just a helpless player in somebody else's story. This is your story. You're writing it. It's creating itself in front of you. And you have choices. And at any given moment throughout your day, you have multiple choices. You have things you could do, things you could think about, beliefs you could adopt or release an infinite number of activities, and you make choices all day long, every day. So don't say that you don't have control over your reality, because you're choosing your reality every single second of every single day. And your choices matter. They build up and you form pathways. It's like eddies in a river. The water forms certain patterns based on repetition. And if you're a person who repeats themselves a lot and you don't really change your routine, then your life will be fairly predictable. But once you awaken, and you start going with the flow and following synchronicity and your signs, listening to your higher guidance, your higher self, and your guides, your non-physical senses, your psychic senses. Once you start doing that, you can't plan your life the same way, because you don't know what's coming around the corner, and you're cool with that, because you know that planning that you used to think you had to do was based on fear from your ego wanting to keep you safe. And once you understand that the ego was never supposed to do that, it's too much work for the ego. That's not its job. It has a job, but it's not to control your life. Once you know that and you realize your higher self should be driving your life, and you realize the higher self works in a different way, in other words, it knows things that you don't know, and it can see ahead in a way that you don't, and it has a bird's eye view in a way that you don't. Once you trust that, and you've proven to yourself through years of practice and shadow work and meditation and all these things, then you live in a different way that's not predictable, because you might make a decision on a whim because you followed your guidance, and you can tell when the energy is aligning for you to go do something different. And it works. I live this way now. I started living this way 11 years ago, but it just keeps increasing, and my level of understanding of it and trust of it just keeps increasing, which means my life gets more and more interesting, more and more rewarding, but less and less predictable, because I'll look back on a year and say, I cannot believe all that happened, and it was all amazing. But I still can't. How did I get here? Because it wasn't planned. But the universe, my higher self, had planned it. They nudge you in ways that would be beneficial to you. That's what intuition is. So sometimes you don't have to know why you want to do something or don't want to do something, or you want to be around a certain person or you don't. Your intuition is psychic senses. It's your higher self trying to give you a clue. So pay attention to that and enhance it with daily meditation practice, and learning how to be observant of yourself. Do shadow work, energy work, learn to be observant of your own energy field, because it's a huge layer of sense that people don't tap into enough. You're always using it, but most people aren't really aware of how much their energy field, interacting with other people's energy fields, controls their lives. Why do you feel great certain times and really drained other times? If you do the inner work and the shadow work and you figure that out, you're going to be able to just make so many better decisions for yourself. It'll change the way you make decisions. So personal responsibility is how I started this message, because of that phrase that, we all want people to take responsibility for themselves, but how often do we hold ourselves to the same standard and say, I was responsible for this or that for myself, but also maybe for other people. And I'm not saying you don't need to feel guilty about that. That's not helpful. Taking responsibility for yourself, you wouldn't have guilt. What guilt is something you give yourself. Nobody gives it to you. You do it to yourself. And I think it feels better to people than to take responsibility and actually change their behavior. Because if you're going to really change your behavior and you know that you've learned, you may or may not speak to the person involved and apologize and take responsibility. I don't know if it depends. I don't know if that's necessary. It depends on the situation. But once you get right with yourself and you know that you've learned and that you're sorry for whatever it was, and you won't do it again because you learned, there's no reason to feel guilt. You can feel compassion and regret, like, oh man, wish that wouldn't have happened. I wish I would have known what I know now. That's being, more educated. You can't blame yourself for what you didn't know in the past. But guilt is not productive. It's a low vibration. And I think it's a cop out a lot of times because people will say, oh, God, I feel so guilty. Oh, I'm so sorry. And you know what? A lot of those people who are serial sorriers, I mean, people who just constantly so sorry about all the things they've done, do they really do anything about it? And do they address their behavior and change? Or do they keep on being the same person that apologizes all the time? Have you noticed that? Some people can just lay on the guilt to themselves, thinking that that's going to make it okay with you, as if their guilt that they gave themselves was a punishment. And you can say, well, see, they punished themselves, so let's just forget it. That doesn't work for me. What shows that a person has taken responsibility for themselves and actually learned and up-leveled is when they change their behavior because they've taken responsibility for themselves. That's being an adult. A very advanced adult. A very advanced adult is what it takes. I know a lot of people who are really intelligent and, they're not infant souls, but they're not old souls. But I don't think they realize that. And they think their intellect is enough um, to make them responsible people. Maybe they're good people, maybe they have good intentions, but a lot of times, if they haven't done their shadow work, their intentions are distorted because they might be codependent. You can have a person do something that looks really kind on the outside, but if their energy and their motives are distorted on the inside, that energy goes into that behavior. Codependence is not empowerment. Wanting to people please because you're afraid that you'll be discarded if you don't is not empowered. An empath who is codependent is not empowered or awakened. Once you know that you're an empath and you don't have to behave this way or people please because you are valuable in your own right and you don't need to make yourself smaller or acquiescent, once you understand that, you are a healed empath and you are no longer codependent. And that's what shadow work and taking responsibility for yourselves can give you. So I guess I'll stop it here because I think I've made the point in numerous ways. And I want to thank you if you listened to all of that. The images that you have been seeing are all images that I created based on bilocations to the other side of the veil, the upper astral, where my twin flame Chris lives. And I am able to visit him there, so I just thought the slideshow that I would have while I'm talking could be these images. They are embedded with higher consciousness energy because I do have that psychic gift of psychometry. So I channel the energy of the higher realms into this artwork. So while you've been listening to my message, you've also been receiving the energetic frequencies of higher consciousness. And that is one way to pass along this knowledge. Instead of necessarily understanding it with an intellectualism, with your smaller human mind, with the intellect, you can understand this information energetically because you've been receiving these codes the whole time I've been talking. They're also in my voice. So this is just a few of the ways that information can be transferred because energy is information. It's visual, it's auditory, it's tactile. Music is a great delivery system, any kind of sound, but so is everything else in existence. It's all information soup that we all live in. So hopefully some of what I said makes sense. I may record more of these as they come. So they are not planned. If I go off on a tangent and lose my train of thought, I'm sorry about that, but it's the best I can do when I'm in I would say a semi-channeling state. It's not a super deep channeling, but it is channeling. I am connected to the other side and to my guides and my twin flame Chris. So sometimes I have to follow the thread of what they're saying while also explaining the concepts. And I want to make sure I explain them properly. So sometimes that takes a while the stream of information from higher consciousness is still coming. So I have to explain it as fast as I can so I can get back to the message that they're sending me. It's basically like translating an energetic language into verbal human language. I'm like an antenna and a transmitter. That's how it feels. Okay, thank you so much if you stuck around, and I appreciate you.